Long ago, on the mountain of Coatepec, deep in the land of Anahuac, a name that means between the waters, a goddess is impregnated by a feather. Falling gently from the heavens above, it lands upon the goddess and becomes the embryo of a mighty god inside her, one who will be fated to raise a great people and inherit this land. The problem is this: the goddess already has her children, 1 daughter and 400 sons. And they are all jealous of the new son about to be born who will deny them their birthright. The daughter is most jealous of all and conspires with her brothers to kill their mother and prevent this new god from ever being born. Deep within the womb of his mother, the god stirs. He tells her not to be afraid for her life, for he is coming to save her. As the sister approaches the mother with her 400 brothers in tow, the embryonic god summons a thunderstorm which hides his mother from within. He then forces his own birth and emerges fully formed, dressed in his beautiful regalia, a blue-green headdress of hummingbird feathers. His name is Huitzilopochtli, the left-handed hummingbird. He is born a warrior, and this is a reputation he will carry with him forever as the fiercest the gods ever saw. Brandishing in his left hand the Siocoat, or fire serpent, and a shield made of eagle feathers, he strikes out at his sister like lightning, beheading her. He then turns to his 400 brothers, who rain down on him a storm of darts and arrows to attempt to kill him. But Huitzilopochtli turns himself into a cloud of smoke, creeping around the throats of his brothers and suffocating them within his smoky body. As his brothers die, their souls are commuted to the heavens and become the stars. Confident in his victory, Huitzilopochtli turns himself into the sun, a heavenly body that will keep watch over the souls of his brothers and protect the earth from their revenge. But it will come at a terrible price, one that must be paid daily by the people he will charge with its responsibility, the blood price of human sacrifice. A heart, torn from the chest of its body on an altar and ripped out by the blade of the flint knife, set on fire in terrible tribute, each day, forever. Hello, and welcome to Can't Go Back, Won't Move On, a paranoid historical storytelling podcast about the history of the Americas as seen by the people who lived it. I'm your host, Gavrilo Z. Our story today begins not in the pages of history, but in the whispers of myth. A god, his chosen people, and the fate he gave them. A fate that, like the riptide, pulled these chosen people from the comfort of their own shores and into the open water of their destiny. We will see how these people respond to their cosmic circumstances, with a story made to make the world make sense. A hummingbird god born for war. An eagle on a cactus. A people chosen to feed the sun. Repeat these stories enough and the myths they contain become a blueprint. Repeat them louder and they become law. It's a story about how a god teaches his people to teach themselves to want empire. And if you want a template for how empires begin and end, listen closely. What looks like destiny is often by design. And so we'll begin here, Can't Go Back, Won't Move On, a podcast where history isn't a story repeating, but a conspiracy unfolding. Episode 1.1, Huitzilopochtli and the People of the Sun. Huitzilopochtli was not the only god. Mesoamerica was filled with them. Conflict between them was inevitable. Huitzilopochtli struggled mightily against the others, some of whom became his most fearsome nemeses. Among them were Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and the dreaded Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. Each of them would conspire in their quest to make a human race truly worthy of worshipping the gods. The struggle of the gods had made and destroyed the world 4 times before, always in violent, catastrophic circumstances, each of these worlds giving birth and dimming the light on the sun of creation. Floods, beasts, fire, and heavy rains had all once smited a world. This world which Huitzilopochtli now sought to rule was the world of the 5th sun. When it was time to make the world again, the gods would meet and debate what it would be. Each of the 4 suns before had been made with a sacrifice of the gods throwing themselves into the crucible of creation. At Teotihuacan, meeting place of these gods, they gathered again and asked who would sacrifice themselves for this new world. They chose 2 deities, a proud one who prepared for his sacrifice with gold and jewels and other refinements, and a humble one, Nanawatsin, who prepared for his journey modestly with paper and grass. But when the time came to throw themselves into the fire, the proud god balked, afraid of the flames and unable to commit himself to burning for creation. In stepped Nanawatsin, who took the proud god's place and threw himself humbly into the fires. He became the fifth sun. The proud god, inspired by Nanawatsin's sacrifice, jumped in after him and became the moon. As this world was created, a prophecy emerged from the flames. This sun would end as well. It would be destroyed by an enormous earthquake which would swallow the world whole. It was the fate of Huitzilopochtli's people to stave off this disaster for as long as they could, knowing that someday their efforts would not be enough. Even still, they would dedicate their entire lives to the gods. This world of the fifth sun, Anahuac, was sometimes described by its people as an island suspended in the cosmos. Other times, it was thought of as the back of a giant crocodile which had emerged from primordial seas. No one could say for sure, though, only knowing that it lay between two endless seas bounding it to the west and to the east. With his brothers defeated and a new world created, Huitzilopochtli set down his weapons of war and created humanity. Reaching into the void, he brought out maize and the bone dust of a long-ago people in order to create the new race of humans who would dedicate their lives to serving him. What he asked of them in return was that they would dedicate sacrifices to him each and every day so he could draw on their strength to fight off the stars and keep the world from being destroyed. His people would listen to his every word. These people were not from Anahuac, however. They came from far to the north, in the rugged red rock deserts of what is today the southwestern United States. Huitzilopochtli's people emerged from one of the 7 caves there known as Chichimostok in a world known as Etzlan. 7 caves for 7 people. The first 6 had already emerged and migrated down into Anahuac. Huitzilopochtli's people, who would often reference caves as places of rebirth and discovery in their stories, were the last to emerge. Later, archaeological evidence would say that these desert dwellers of Etzlan were the descendants of ancient prehistoric humans who, for reasons known only to them, crossed over a mighty land bridge between Asia and the Americas 20,000 years ago or more. In doing so, they became the final act of a great tale of migrations that brought humankind out of Africa and across the 4 corners of the world. This world of Etzlan was watched over by Huitzilopochtli. It was a hard world. The desert was not suitable for growing food, and the people lived on snakes and lizards, eating whatever they could catch or forage. It was a barbaric world, as they would later describe it themselves, and they were its self-described chichimecas, or barbarians. Deep in Etzlan, as these people gathered around campfires and told stories between themselves and guests, they would hear rumors of a land far to the south filled with water and volcanoes and food which grew out of the ground, and the powerful empires who ruled it. They took these stories and prayed to Huitzilopochtli for guidance. Could he lead them out of Etzlan and down into this dream world they had heard so much about? But dealing with the gods is always a tricky business. They'll give you what you ask for, but not always the way you want it. Huitzilopochtli heard the prayers of his people and made them an agreement that he would lead them to a home they had never been to. In the process, they would become so transformed by their journey, they would never return to the home that they had come from. To mark this, Huitzilopochtli changed the people's name from Azteca, as they had been known, to Mexica. In this new world, they would always be outsiders, barbarians who were fated to one day overthrow the people who now held this land and rule it to a degree it had never known before. But they would not be of it. And one day, Huitzilopochtli reminded them, the world they ruled in the age of the fifth sun would be destroyed in the earthquake of change, and Huitzilopochtli would collect on the cosmic debt owed to him by his people. Surely, these people must have had their doubts, asked for greater clarity from their patron god to understand why it had to be like this. But the gods are not often in the mood for justifying their mysteries. And so the Mexica agreed. Huitzilopochtli held out his left hand and pointed toward the south, and instructed his people to follow in his direction as far as they could go, stretching their travels across inhospitable deserts and enormous mountain ranges that test their dedication and willingness to suffer for a chance of a new beginning. The Mexica set out on a journey that would take them over 200 years to complete. It began in fits and starts. At first, it was the young men who set out to find and populate this new land. They could travel the farthest and the fastest by leaving behind their families and raiding the villages and tribes they found scattered across the lands of today's northern Mexico. They brought with them the bow and arrow, a novel invention in those years that the more southerly people found overpowering. Warriors wielding spears or throwing lances would be shredded in a haze of arrows that seemingly rained down from the sky of the blinding sun of Huitzilopochtli, tearing them to pieces before they even knew what happened. As Chichimeca, these men lived on what they could pillage and the slaves they could capture. Huitzilopochtli guided them on their warpath to the south, watching the journey harden his people into warriors whose willingness to live and die for his ideal would make them a nearly unstoppable force. Whether or not these early Mexica took the captives for sacrificing to Huitzilopochtli at this point is uncertain. But he watched from above at the progress of his people, and just as he promised, they began to change. Despite all their warring and pillaging, these were still human beings with human needs. The barbarians sometimes took women as slaves, but also married into these groups, giving way to future generations of Mexica, who, like the Mongol Khans who conquered the Han before being absorbed into their culture, found themselves adopting the habits and customs of their victims. And so it was that, after hundreds of years, the left-handed hummingbird god had delivered his people from their exodus to Lake Texcoco, a saltwater lake in the basin of a valley which sat suspended 2,000 meters in the air of the Central Valley, ringed by a perimeter of jagged mountains and volatile volcanoes. Its unique geography made it susceptible to microclimates that also insulated the valley from the hot and humid coasts. It was a dream world, inhabited by a mosaic of people whose differences were innumerable, but largely spoke the same language, Nahuatl, and were united by a cosmic sense of time represented by a magnificent dual calendar system, an expert astrologist who watched the skies every night for signs of approval or disgrace from the gods they worshipped. The Mexica would watch and learn from these people and adopt their ways as they sought to gain a foothold in this new world of Anahuac. Weary from traveling, they found their exodus had led them to a land that was already one of the most densely populated in the world at the time. Huitzilopochtli may have promised them a new land, but he never said it would be earned without suffering. Their pilgrimage was, in one sense, over, but in another sense only in transition. When making deals with the gods, the terms are never fully outlined and the price is never fully itemized. The Mexica found themselves with a new home, but a home that had no welcome for them. And the Valley of Mexico, as it was to be known, was no stranger to struggle and suffering, as it had seen civilizations rise and fall before. One of these early civilizations, hundreds of years before the Mexica's arrival, had once been the dominant power of the valley, but somehow angered the gods and provoked one of their infamous fits of destruction in the form of a volcanic eruption. The fallout from this explosion buried the town in lava and ash like an American Pompeii. But power tends to materialize where power has disappeared, and in the disappearance of this forgotten empire rose another civilization, one of the greatest and most mysterious in Mesoamerican history. As the Mexica passed over the mountains and down into the valley toward the fertile lake at its center, they most certainly would have encountered the ruins of this civilization, today named Tula, and it had once been the seat of the Toltecs. The Toltecs had reigned in the valley for hundreds of years from their city-state of Tula, under the cult of Quetzalcoatl, one of Huitzilopochtli's greatest rivals. They were admired by civilizations for hundreds of years after their disappearance for the excellence of their artwork and agricultural achievements, and to their adherence to strict schedules of ritual. The Mexica would long feel an inferiority to these people. As outsiders, their bloodline was worthless in the eyes of the valley's many people who already settled there. And so the Mexica would seek legitimacy through Toltec blood in the generations to come, hoping both to imitate them and surpass them in their works and lineage. By the time these migrating Mexica had made it to their destination, it was hard to say how much of what made the Mexica was Mexica as it had been, and how much was Mexica as it was now, an inseparable blend of the people who dotted the landscape between Utah and Mexico, and whose differences blurred together or sharpened as people married, settled, and fought among each other for land in this hard-fought world. They had proven themselves not only as warriors in service to Huitzilopochtli, but adaptable in their circumstances. Both skills would remain essential to their survival and success. But as the Mexica well understood, history is not simply linear, but also recursive. The past dictated the present. Worlds are born and worlds die. People rise and then they fall. This was the nature of the instability of life in Anahuac. The Mexica were tired from their wanderings and wanted to stop and settle where they were, But it was said that when some Mexica tried to end this migration, Huitzilopochtli appeared and devoured the hearts of these cowards. Message sent, message received. Their work was not yet done. And so the Mexica continued on and wandered the rocky shores of Lake Texcoco, hungry and unwelcome, subsisting again off the snakes and lizards for food, and begging the settled inhabitants for a place in the sun. But the people refused. In this land of pain and struggle, nothing was given for free. The problem for the Mexica was that the politics of the valley were relational. No one believed that power came from individuals, but from the relationships between them. And the Mexica, as barbarians, lacked the necessary political relations. Huitzilopochtli had given his people a land without a home and left them in silence to square the circle they now found themselves in. The basic political unit in Mesoamerica was the Altepet, a Nahuatl word meaning water hill, and which can loosely be translated as city-state in our own political terms. These were one-off cities whose populations could range from 10,000 to, in the most exceptional cases, over 200. These Altepeme, in the plural, were typically led by a Tlatoani who was elected by a governing council or leading members of prominent families. These prominent families were organized into what were called calpoli, and often were grouped together in the Altepet in something akin to wards or neighborhoods. Each calpoli would have a smaller number of families living together in some hierarchical formation, led by a leader who would then confer with the governing council of the Altepet. And, without an Altepet of their own, the Mexica were not even granted the dignity of a recognized Tlatoani, which means speaker, who would legitimize them as a proper people with their own sovereign. The Mexica would spend generations lurking the perimeter of the lake looking for a home. Hardened from generations of migration, their skins still blistered in the blinding sun, their stomachs weakened from decades of living on the scurrying creatures no one else would eat. Huitzilopochtli watches his people as they begin a ceremony in his honor. Quail and other small animals are brought to the altar as a priest slits their throats and drips the blood over the stone, holding up his kill in homage to their lord. The crowd is hushed. On either side of the priest, fires blaze in their braziers. The priest takes out the heart and tosses it into the fire. It is still thick with blood and moisture and smokes. The priest seems to speak through the smoke, commanding it to float his words up to his God who, pleased with the sacrifice, listens intently. The priest speaks. "O Lord," he says, "your people are tired. For generations we have walked this land, and for generations we have been without a home. When we wanted to stop, you commanded us to move, and so we moved. You ordered us to kill, and we killed. Have we not pleased the Lord? Tell us, O Lord, tell us where your orphans may find their home." A moment passes. The people watch their priest. The smoke wisps and lashes out from the brazier and climbs to the heavens. Suddenly, the priest is seized. His eyes roll back in his head and his body convulses in the theatrics of vision. In a voice the priest alone can hear, Huitzilopochtli speaks. "My child," he says, "my revelation for you is that my people will settle where a prickly pear cactus grows from a rock. Atop this cactus, an eagle will make his nest there, and that will be the site not only of your Altepet, but of the greatest city the valley will know." The vision ends. The priest is released from its grasp. He returns his gaze to the onlookers, watching in total silence. He looks upon the people waiting for his answer and speaks out to them. "O Mexica," he says, "Huitzilopochtli has appeared to me. He has shown me where we are to settle. When we discover it, we shall be fortunate, for there we shall find our rest, our comfort, and our grandeur. There our name will be praised, and our Mexica nation made great. The might of our arms will be known, and the courage of our brave hearts will be seen. With these we shall conquer nations, near and distant. We shall subdue towns and cities from sea to sea. We shall become lords of gold and of silver, of jewels and precious stones, of splendid feathers and of the insignia. We shall rule over those people, their lands, their sons, and their daughters. They will serve us and be our subjects and tributaries." This story would be repeated for generations as the founding story of the Mexica, the moments when they became not the people of myth, but of history. Notice the grammar. Huitzilopochtli has appeared to me. One priest, one night. One vision which grows teeth as it is repeated across the generations. How much of a foundation is built on a single sentence. But the Mexica were not ready to listen yet. They could not find this prickly pear-borne cactus and its crested eagle. Instead, they settled on a hill on the western shore of Lake Texcoco known as Chapultepec, which means Grasshopper Hill, and was a location of deep importance to an Altepet named Culhuacan. Culhuacan itself was a descendant of the Toltecs. The Toltecs' time had passed, though, and their lineage became entangled with the Culhuacan, who saw no reason to allow these Chichimeca Mexica to occupy Chapultepec. And so they fought. The Culhuacan slaughtered the Mexica and forced their leader to sacrifice all of his daughters before murdering the man himself. Culhuacan drove them out of Chapultepec and forced them to pay tribute. The Mexica would settle just north of Culhuacan, on the southern shores of Lake Texcoco, and pledge themselves as barbarian mercenaries who would fight in the name of Culhuacan against all of its enemies in the valley. The Culhuacan Tlatoani viewed the Mexica as little more than dogs, and sent them on the most dangerous and possible battles he could. Each time the Mexica succeeded and returned, prompting the Tlatoani to exclaim, "Who are these Mexica?" They were an army. They were his army. On this muddy peninsula, on the southern shores of the lake, the Mexica wondered if this was all Huitzilopochtli had intended for them. The pattern of wandering, settling, and being chased off, humiliated and defeated, had dogged them now for centuries. Their people were tired and losing faith. The priests prayed to Huitzilopochtli again. Huitzilopochtli commanded the Mexica to ask for the daughter of the Culhuacan Tlatoani as a way of cementing the bonds between the two people. And so the Mexica did as their god asked, and requested that the Tlatoani give up his most prized daughter to them as a way of beginning the relational politics of the valley that all Altepeme depended on. The Tlatoani agreed and gave his most beautiful daughter to the Mexica, whose priests took her gladly and invited the Tlatoani to a ritual feast to bind their peoples together forever in the tradition of politics played in this region of the world. The Tlatoani arrived and waited for the ceremony to begin. Depending on how much the Mexica could afford to spare, it might have been a lavish meal of fruits from far corners of Anahuac, quail, lizards, and the famed cacao drink. They would have danced and told stories and spoken in the high register of Nahuatl, humbling themselves before the Tlatoani in the curiously reversed speech of humility that marked court dialogue in the Nahuatl world. But the night was not yet over, and Huitzilopochtli's final instructions had yet to be carried out, because it was not here on the southern peninsula that he wanted as a home for his chosen people. To get them where he wanted, he commanded one more task of the Mexica. Feasting and drinking, the guests have been enjoying themselves. The night has gone long. A finale has overtaken the evening. A hush comes over the crowd. The Tlatoani of Culhuacan takes notice and looks up from his feast. A figure shambles into view. The Tlatoani, in the dim hours of the evening lit by waning fires, struggles to see what he is looking at. As it comes closer, he can make out the details. A strange figure, shambling in ceremonial dance, wearing what looks to be the pelt of some kind of animal draping over the black-painted body and blood-mottled hair of a priest. The shambling pelt stumbles closer to the Tlatoani and he gazes upon it. He sees what looks to be eyes carved out from its face, a mouth hanging gaped open. Holes where the ears should be, with the priests instead poking through. It looks to be a woman, no animal at all. The flayed skin of a woman. To his horror, the Tlatoani sees now that this is the skin of his daughter gifted to the Mexica. They have flayed her and worn her skin as a costume in the strange ritual dance of the sacrifice celebrated by these Chichimeca, the dance commanded by Huitzilopochtli. The Tlatoani stands up, overcome with emotion. He demands that these barbarians be exterminated. His warriors waste no time. They rise up and then rise down on the Mexica, slaughtering the priests and then the feasters. Survivors flee into the night. The warriors pursue. Other Mexica, back at camp, awake to the sound of screams. They see the carnage of their people being destroyed once again. They flee to the edge of the peninsula and jump into their canoes to escape into the dark waters of Lake Texcoco. Battered, humiliated, and once again rootless, the Mexica drag themselves onto the shores of the island in time to see, in the middle of the island, the prophesied eagle, perched on top of a cactus growing out of a rock. Was this really the place they had been ordered to settle by Huitzilopochtli? This swampy island only left vacant because no one else could be bothered to settle it? And if so, had it been necessary for the Mexica to have lost so many of their own in the massacre by the Culhuacan warriors in order to find it? Had Huitzilopochtli assisted him, or had he abandoned them? It was an unanswerable question, even to the surviving priests of the Mexica, who were once again left in the agony of ambiguity over the gods which had made their promises but demanded so much in return. Huitzilopochtli, for reasons known only to him, had led them all this way to a miserable swamp of an island amidst one of the most fertile lands in the world. From one angle, it might seem like a crude joke. From another, it might have seemed more as evidence of the mysterious thinking of the gods. For the Mexica, depending on the day, they might have said it was both. They weren't a people without irony and could appreciate a good joke, even, or especially, a cosmic one. But they also saw Huitzilopochtli's hand in the creation of the city, and would later describe their Altepet as the link between the 13 layers of heaven above and the 9 layers of the underworld beneath, the center of all creation. This was where Huitzilopochtli had told them to settle their Altepet, and so they settled it, naming it Tenochtitlan, which means beside the fruits of the cactus. Tired from their endless journey, they craved a foundation on which they could build an entire world. Later, it was said that Huitzilopochtli had revealed himself to his priests once more, stating, "Tell the Mexica people that the principal men, each with his relatives and friends and allies, should divide the city into 4 main wards. The center of the city will be the house you have constructed for my resting place, and let each group build its part of the city as it wishes." And so they did, building the city in 4 quadrants with cardinal roads which divided neatly between the ruling Calpoli. They were enormously proud of the founding of their city, and considered it the culmination of Huitzilopochtli's ambitions for them. As one Mexica poem about the city describes, Tenochtitlan was, "Proud of itself, is the city of Mexico Tenochtitlan. Here no one fears to die in war. This is our glory, this is your command. O giver of life, have this in mind. O princes, who would conquer Tenochtitlan? Who could shake the foundation of heaven?" For all the portrayals of the Mexica as blood-soaked zealots who ruled by terror, that image is as much invention as memory. Their enemies carved it into libel, but the Mexica themselves polished it into armor. A mask meant to terrify rivals, and perhaps even remind to their own restless subjects why obedience mattered. But behind the mask, they looked like anyone else. They worked, they prayed, they traded, they raised families. They sang poetry about the fragility of life. They were warriors, yes, but also philosophers, priests, and merchants, bound to the same contradictions as any people. They had fallen before and knew what it meant to live humbly at the margins. On their swampy island, dismissed by the valley's powers, they saw not humiliation but the seed of destiny. They were no longer wanderers. Here the myth could take root. But myth alone does not fend off enemies. Stories don't stop Culhuacan's armies. Power does. Patronage does. And so the Mexica learned quickly what all empires must learn: to cloak themselves in cosmic destiny while wading knee-deep into the grime of politics. They became masters of both, and prisoners of the myth they built. They called the city a link between heaven and underworld. That language has a truth to it. Tenochtitlan would be a stage where gods and men negotiated power. But there is a darker symmetry. The Mexica's cosmological center would also make them legible, visible, desirable, and vulnerable to others. What they built to worship a god, the world would later read as a reason to break them. The prophecy that founded them supplied the script that would justify their undoing. If you think fate built this city, consider instead that someone wrote that fate down, burned the contradictory pages, and made sure the story looked inevitable. Next week, we'll exit the realm of myth and enter the world of history as we look at some of the first verifiable events in Mexica history and follow them throughout the development of their Altepet, one which would soon become not only the grandest city of the valley, but the seat of its empire, and the king who built it on an alliance of blood. And so that's all for this episode of Can't Go Back, Won't Move On. Written, narrated, and produced by Gavrilo Z, with music composed and performed by Jake K. If you like the show, tell your friends. All my listeners are appreciated. Goodbye.